Alrighty, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show with your host, Chris. No nicknames, Condit. I'm flying solo today because Alex is still on vacation and I don't have enough friends for more guest hosts. And we're here today to talk about the West Ham game that was not the result that we wanted. Look ahead to the Champions League tie against Celtic later on this week. And talk a little bit about the transfer news that's going on out there. It's going to be a shorter pod because it's just me and nobody wants to hear me ramble on for an hour except maybe me. But I understand the audience here, and we're going to keep it relatively short. The governor's a little bit off, more so than normal, because there's no one to rein in my opinions like Alex usually does or my guest hosts have, and I like to feature them as well. But we'll talk about West Ham. We'll talk about Celtic. We'll talk a little bit of the transfer news that's been going on because there have been a flurry of activity around the club, or at least rumors of activity. And we'll discuss it all today. And then we'll get into what's coming up the rest of this year, I'm sorry, the rest of this month. I apologize. But first, let me do some housekeeping. Go follow the socials. They're linked in the show notes as always. Apple, Amazon Music, YouTube. Go check out our interview again with Paul Faulkner and Doug Wright, MBE. Again, very important surprise and contest coming up for that one. Thanks again to Paul and Doug. There will be further updates, as we keep saying, later on in February after we meet with our legal department. So let's get straight into the match recap. West Ham, home. We were all hoping for a good result for Aston Villa in this one. Really thought that the club needed 3 points coming off the Monaco loss and just position in the table, all those things. And for the first 35 minutes or so, it looked great. It looked like that's what we were going to get. But boy, it didn't end that way, did it? So let's talk about how we got there a little bit. Let's start with the lineup. First and foremost, I think that I'm going to speak for pretty much everybody here that I was a little surprised that there weren't more changes made. I know that in the previous pod, I threw out an absolutely bonkers lineup because I thought that how mad Unai Emery was following the Monaco loss. He was going to make wholesale changes to make a point. Now, that goes to show you that Unai Emery is much less reactive than I am. And that's a positive, right? We want that sort of level head shepherding the flock, as it were, or heading the team. And I think that showed a lot of faith in the players that he didn't make huge changes. The biggest surprise to me was that Bailey was still out there and it wasn't Daniel Malin's debut, especially given that Malin is still cup tied and he will not be able to feature on Wednesday against Celtic. So, but outside of JJ in for Buendia, there were no changes to the lineup that was so disappointing to Unai Emery and the rest of us at Monaco. But it looked like Unai had pushed the right button because it started off fantastic. I mean, you could not have asked for a better start. The team looked lively. They were creating chance after chance after chance. You could see what they were trying to do. It was a very clear game plan, and it was working. They got an early goal, Rodgers at 8 minutes, and it was an absolute beauty. It also gave Ollie Watkins his 100th goal involvement with the assist with Aston Villa. So from there, it kind of looked like it was going to be a great day for Villa and a long day for West Ham because Villa went, following the goal, Villa went right back on the attack and had a goal ruled out for offside, had a few shots blocked, had a couple shots saved. It really looked like we were going to start having a 2-0, 3-0 type day. But then what happens? Tyrone Mings goes down, and it's what? It's his knee. And we all know what that did in the stadium. I was watching the game at a bar here in Raleigh with the brothers Young. Those of you who watched the last pod or listened to the last pod met Patty, the podfather, in person. And you could feel the air come out of the stadium on the broadcast. You could feel the air come out of the bar that we were sitting in. It was just 5 of us. So it immediately had an impact on the game. And I think from that moment forward, Villa really struggled to get hold of the game. And you could see West Ham growing in confidence as the game motored along. And tactically, Villa had no replacement for Mings because Carlos had just been sold. And so what happens is Ian Maatson comes in with then Luca Dean sliding inside, playing center back, a position he is very clearly uncomfortable playing. And that's not to discredit him, but he really struggled playing center back. And I thought it was interesting that Martinez continued to play the ball to him to play in the role that Mings is playing going forward, which we've talked about in the last couple of weeks that Mings struggles to do. Now you're asking a guy who never plays that position to be a ball carrying center back instead of, a left wing back that is moving forward and playing off of the center back and off of the midfield. I thought it was a really difficult ask, and I thought it put Luca Dean in a really difficult spot, and it showed. I mean, he really had a tough go of it, and you really can't fault him for it because it's not anywhere close to his natural position. So, if you can fault Emery for one thing, it would be that move. I think I would have probably inserted Bogart or Boharde. I've now heard it both ways, so it's gonna be a Tielemans situation. But because at least then you could drop him as a center back. He has played there before, but even still, you could play almost like a back three with Konsa. I know you're going to be spread wide with Cash and Dean, but you could then drop Bogart deep as a deep playing defensive mid, but essentially play a back four. I think that may have been the better move to make there. But what do I know? Like I said in the last pod, I haven't won a single game in the Premier League, whereas Unai Emery has. So I thought that Mings' injury combined with the lack of squad depth at that position now really changed the game and really changed the momentum of the game. And maybe not from that moment on, but pretty close to it. It was pins and needles for the entire time. And you were just waiting for that goal to come and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it looked like West Ham were growing and growing and growing into the game. And Villa were struggling more and more to get hold of it. So I think Mings' injury really changed the game. It obviously hurts us in the air when you lose Tyrone Mings at the center back and you're putting Luca Dean, a player who is not particularly good in the air anyway, with Ezri Konsa in the center. It makes the team worse, obviously. It didn't end up costing because the goal actually came from Matty Cash's side, back post. But it still was obvious that it was a struggle. And you have to expect now that the team is going to make some sort of change with bringing in another center back. We were already expecting one to come in. Now you absolutely need one because if Mings is out for any period of time, he's not going to be able to go. And we have no real center back to play right now. It's Bogart. He'd be your best option. So I'm not sure what the plan going forward is, but you expect something to come now. So the last note I want to have from the first half is that Paqueta probably should have gotten a yellow card for diving from that quote-unquote elbow from Luca Dean. And I know I've seen some West Ham fans on social media talking about how Dean needs to be red carded for that. I mean, my goodness, man. Like it was, if we're calling that an elbow, come on. It was a slight nudge like this, and Paqueta goes down like he got shot. So in my view, and you all know I love to complain about VAR, right? In my view, if you look at VAR on that and you see there's no violent contact or violent conduct, then it's obviously a dive. So if it's not a red card on Luka Dean, it's a yellow on Paqueta by process of elimination. So my opinion, he deserves a yellow for that dive. But it didn't come, and the second half is almost all West Ham. A couple important notes for Villa. Malen debuts at the 65th minute. Duran comes on at the same time as well. I thought Malen made a decent debut in his time, especially given how much Leon Bailey struggled in the game once again. In 70 minutes is when the goal that had been coming finally arrived. It was a beautiful ball from Alvarez to Emerson, who puts Alvarez puts a perfect ball. I mean, letter perfect, inch perfect to the back post to an arriving Emerson, who beats Matty Cash because Cash was marking inside the box. I forget who was standing a little bit inside to the far post, and Cash was concerned about him. Emerson pretty much comes out of the wing position to arrive at the perfect moment with just an outstanding ball from Alvarez to put it in a spot where only Emerson is going to get to it, and it's an easy finish. The first question that I was asked was, is that on Cash? And I don't think you can entirely blame him, because you can see his defensive responsibility, he feels like, is to that man in front, and he's trying to get close to mark him. He sees the ball coming and he realizes, oh no, I'm beat behind. But sometimes you're just beat. Like sometimes a guy just makes a perfect pass, and that's, I think, what happened here. It was an absolutely beautiful ball from Alvarez to really make Emerson's job easy, and it's an easy finish, 1-1. And the rest of the game was very much largely West Ham, and you were worried that they might get a second. But the one thing that I do want to talk about, and I think everybody knew this was coming too, was Alvarez absolutely should have picked up that second yellow for stopping a counter I believe he grabbed Morgan Rogers to slow him down. He was already on a yellow. It's a professional foul to slow a counter, but it's the type of foul that you make to pick up a card. And it's the type of foul that gets a card every time. And my frustration, and I think Aston Villa's frustration, is like, just because he's on a yellow card doesn't mean he gets to make that foul unpunished. Now, I will say, I don't think it would have made a lick of difference. I don't think that West Ham being down 10 men at that point changes too much, because Villa by that point were so toothless and so lacking in attacking creativity, even with John Duran out there. The dual change that Emery made to take Ramsey and Rogers off was a strange one to me, because those were the two most progressive players that were carrying the ball forward best. And I again thought that was a strange move. Alex would probably say, subs didn't work, and they very clearly did not. Duran didn't work well anyway. The double change with Rogers and JJ failed miserably, and the team did not create anything of substance for the last 30 minutes of the game or so, the 25 minutes at least of the game. So a really frustrating draw for me, and I think for everybody at Aston Villa, or any Aston Villa fans. I really wanted 3 points from that, and I think we all did, because West Ham have been struggling, because it was at home at Villa Park. Now Villa are still unbeaten in 11 or whatever at Villa Park, but this was a draw that felt like a loss, if we're being honest. So I'm disappointed in the result. I think you all are too, and I'd be surprised if anybody feels differently. If you do feel differently, if you feel like we deserve more out of that game, if you think I'm way off base here, I'd love to hear it. I don't see how anyone could watch that game and say, "Oh yeah, Villa were the better team there," because they weren't. And the fact that we've talked about how West Ham as a roster are kind of a mess, it's disappointing to see that Villa can't get over the hump and beat that team at home. I the 3 points, I just don't want to look back and be 2 points short of Europe, sitting in 8th or 7th or whatever it may be, depending on how the coefficient shakes out, and look back at that game and say, man, I wish we'd picked up those 2 points. Overall, disappointing day. I thought a lot of players struggled, and we'll talk about the good points and bad points now. Watkins' goal involvement, always a positive. I think we're continuing to see growth or not growth, I should say, but more confidence building in him. He had a great header that was just a touch wide, and I don't want to hear anybody saying that Duran finishes that or anything like that, because that was just off, just a little bit wide of the far post. Malin, I thought, had a decent debut in his 25 minutes. I thought Boubacar Kamara was a revelation. He doesn't get enough credit. I know we try and credit him. There are more and more people talking about how great he is. He is fantastic. I read a stat from Who Scored that no one won more duels than Kamara last weekend in the Prem. And so just his almost day in and day out consistency can get overlooked. So I want to highlight how well he played. The bad points, we talked a little bit about it. Ming's injury leaves Villa with pretty much one healthy center back, and that's not a good place to be. Pau is going to be out for at least a couple more weeks. Mings, it looked bad. We thought that he had maybe ended his career again, but he posted on Instagram today that he's had bad knee injuries, and this isn't one of them, and that he would be back, but I still haven't found a timeline yet for when he's going to be back. And Leon Bailey continues to struggle, and I'm really starting to worry about that, because we know what a streaky player he can be, and his struggles this season have been in large part and parcel with Aston Villa's struggles this season. So as we look ahead at the implication on the season, Villa now sit 8th, which is where they sat before the game started, but 8th with a -1 goal differential, 4 points back from 4th, but effectively that's 5 points due to the goal differential. And I can hear Alex from Japan telling me that goal differential is going to come back and haunt us. And I really hope that that's not the case, because I've been saying all season that Unai Emery's never going to care about goal differentials, so we can't harp on it. But I may end up having to admit that Alex was right, which is not a position I want to be in. So for me, this was a day, and I talked about it already, that Villa needed to pick up all 3 points and failed to do it. And we can't keep having these sort of days if we want to stay in Europe. And I'm not talking about in Champions League. I'm talking about just staying in European comps. There has to be some more consistency day in and day out, week in and week out in the league. Otherwise, we're not going to finish where we want and need to finish. So you have to beat these teams that are beatable coming in at home. I know that Mings going out was a tough blow, and that leads me to another point, that more squad depth is still needed here. We talked about it a little bit in the last pod, that it's now about not just pure bodies, although to some extent it is, but it's about the quality of depth that we have. We certainly aren't good enough to challenge for the top of the league. But if we want to be consistently in Europe and eventually challenge for a title, that's the next step in the evolution here. And I'm sure that's what Monchi and Emery and the ownership group is talking about and working on. Now, I will say, like 5 years ago, even longer, 10 years ago, 15 years, maybe not quite 15, but the Paul Lambert years, we would take a season like this every single day of the week, right? Where the performances are a little inconsistent, but you're comfortably mid-table, probably finishing in the top half, maybe getting a shot at Europe. The issue now is that we've been spoiled. We've seen what this team can achieve when they're at their best, and it's largely the same team, right? And that isn't happening this season. And that's the frustration, I think, not just for us as fans, but for the players, for Unai Emery, for management, for owners. I want this team to get back to where they were consistently playing well. Now, Alex would always tell you that they were outplaying their metrics. So this may just be a simple regression to the mean, which is what everybody wants to talk about on a soccer podcast, right? But the point is the performances need to be much better, much more consistent if Aston Villa want to get where we need to be financially and beyond to compete consistently for top 4 league titles, Champions League, all these things that we don't want to be a one-off, right? We don't want to just get here, show up for a year, and then be back down mid-table or lower. That's not why Unai Emery was brought in. That's not what these owners want, and it's not what's going to benefit the club most financially in the long run. So the next couple of days here in the transfer window at the end could be a make or break. And I know I just said a couple of pods ago that very rarely do you make or break your season in January, but with the injuries and with the form that we've seen, I think we may have a potential make or break transfer window depending on who is brought in or not. So that's my whole take on West Ham. A frustrating day, not what we wanted. And if anybody feels different, that we deserve more out of that, because I certainly don't, please let me know in the comments. That leads us to Celtic and the UEFA Champions League. Wednesday at 3:00, which is going to be total chaos. And unfortunately, I will not be able to watch it. I'll tell you more about that later, because all the games kick off at the same time. And it's going to be like a end of a championship Sunday type feel, because there's going to be a lot of scoreboard watching, including with us. All right, so Celtic currently are first in the Scottish Prem, 10 points clear of Rangers. They are 18th and guaranteed to go through to the next round of the Champions League. They will be past the clip, and they will advance to the knockout stages in the playoff round. All of their wins so far in Champions League play have been at home. They got absolutely pumped by Dortmund, 7-1 away, and they have a pair of 0-0 draws away. But otherwise, all their points in Champions League have come from a handful of wins and then 2-3 draws. So they play better at home than they do away in Champions League. Not surprising. They've also had some tougher matches away from home in the Champions League. And my hope is that this one is for them as well. From a tactical standpoint, they look like a potentially more difficult matchup than we would expect, given the level of quality between the Premier League and the Scottish Premiership. They attack very well, particularly in the Premiership, not so much in the Champions League, not so much especially away from home. They create far fewer chances away from home in the Champions League, and they set up almost exclusively. I couldn't find one where they didn't set up in a 4-3-3. Some key players, Kasper Schmeichel is their goalkeeper, and he's played every minute of the Champions League so far, and he's a familiar face, obviously, from his time at Leicester. He and Callum McGregor have logged every single minute of playing time in the Champions League. Nicholas Kuhn, a 25-year-old midfielder, has also logged a ton of Champions League minutes, 88% of the time. So those are the three guys that I will highlight, because I'm positive they're going to be on the pitch. And from an attacking standpoint, I think this is another game where Villa have to come out and dominate and put them to the sword early. Otherwise, the atmosphere is going to get really nervy at Villa Park. And I think that when that happens, that's going to let Celtic grow into the game. I expect that they're going to have a decent amount of away fans, traveling fans there. So if they're allowed to grow into the game, I don't think that's going to be a positive for Villa. So what do I expect? On paper, this is a game that Aston Villa should win and win handily if you ask a lot of people. However, recent form makes you question whether or not they can. And they are also a little stretched with injuries, as we talked about at center back. And they're a little limited in terms of what they can do on the wing because Daniel Malen is still cup tied until the next round. We have to get out of the clip, the Champions League phase, to utilize Malen in the Champions League. So for a lineup, I'm guessing at it, guys. I'm not gonna lie. I'm guessing even more so than usual because the limitations in terms of the squad are real now. Emi Martinez in goal is probably the easiest part. Cash, Konsa, I say Boharde at center back, Luka Dean, Kamara and Tielemans playing in the defensive midfield, McGinn on the right, Rodgers and JJ on the left. And I think Duran up top. I think the fact that Ollie Watkins didn't started, I should say, even though he came off at the 65th minute against West Ham, I think the fact that Duran started leads me to believe, that Watkins started leads me to believe that Duran is going to go. For a score, I'm disappointed to say I think it's going to be a 2-2 draw. Transfer news, we know Carlos is gone. 10 million is the rumored fee. Buendia is being rumored to be loaned out to Bayern Leverkusen. And look at me. I'm so bad at this without Alex. I didn't change the little bug on YouTube. Sorry, everybody that is watching. The dozens of you that are watching right now are probably sitting there going, how did you not change the bug up in the upper left-hand corner? Emi Buendia rumored to be loaned to Bayern Leverkusen, which makes sense because as much as we love Emi Buendia here, and I think he's got a special place in the hearts of a lot of villains, he has looked a step off of it this season, and he's struggled to get minutes, which leads you to believe that the boss doesn't see what he needs to see from him. And that's nothing against Buendia because he's such a terrific player, and he was such a great part of what Aston Villa was coming into this season. And that unfortunate injury, I think, really set him back. And you can see that the quickness isn't quite where it used to be. In terms of incomings, rumors are flying right now. Juan Foyth is rumored to be coming in. Axel Diazy is said to have reached personal terms with Aston Villa, but Chelsea and Villa are still working out the terms of what I would expect to be a loan for Diazy because Chelsea paid somewhere around 40 million for him. And I don't expect Villa to pay that, especially given that Diazy has struggled to see the pitch at Chelsea and struggled to find his footing. So I think they would be mostly interested in a loan in that instance. Also, João Felix, once again, he's like a rash that never goes away. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing in this case. He is once again rumored to be coming in potentially on loan again. His wages are super high, so it would have to be a loan where Chelsea pay a huge chunk of his wages. One interesting note that I wanted to add is that the rumored loan fee for Buendia is £1 million, which is a decent fee at this stage of the game here to get in. So if that's the case, I would take that. I would take either or both of those two defenders, Foyth and Diazy. I'm sorry, have I been saying Diazy the whole time? Jeez Louise, I need Alex here to help me. Disazi, I'm so sorry. This is why I have a co-host, kids, because I can't do this by myself, and we're just muddling through it, you know. Can't believe I've been doing that for the last minute 30 or what I've been doing. But if you think I'm going to edit it out, I am not. I'm a man of principle here. So I would take either or both of those two guys because they both fill a need, and we desperately need depth at center back. I'm intrigued by Yao Felix. Clearly, Emery sees something that he likes in him enough to constantly pursue him in virtually every transfer window. So you wonder now if this is a deal that Emery's going to push to get over the line one way or another. But we have 3 days left in the window. We'll see what happens. You have to expect 1 to 2 more incomings at least, and potentially 1 to 2 more outgoings. It's going to be an interesting watch, and we will see what Villa does because they cannot sit now and wait for guys to get healthy. In terms of upcoming with the pod, you guys know that Alex is on assignment, snowboarding in Japan. I am headed out as well, so there will be no post-match reaction pod to Celtic because neither Alex nor I will be in position to record one. You can't see the chaos behind me, but we are heading to Disney World with our 2 lovely children, and my wife does not schedule these trips around Aston Villa's Champions League games. Leave nasty words for her in the comments if you'd like. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Also, I'm pretty sure we booked this before Villa even qualified for Champions League. So we will be on vacation. Alex remains on vacation, but he will be back on the weekend to look ahead, to look back at the game against Celtic, and then look ahead to the Premier League schedule. And I will be back next week. So a little bit of a break because Alex and I are both on vacation at the same time, which is not ideal. But it's just the way things worked out. Hopefully I'm wrong about my 2-2 draw prediction for Celtic. And all that's left to say now, I guess, is up the Villa.
Hi, Mom and Dad.